So I've been living in the UK for a few weeks now, and I've been wanting to put together a culture shock video since day one, but I'm not gonna lie, I haven't had any culture shock since being here. I mean, I grew up with a British dad, I've been to the UK a few times, and overall the culture is really the most similar to the US compared to the other places I've lived before, which is China, Vietnam, and the Czech Republic. So I really made it my mission to put on, my first time traveler cap this week and try to really notice everything that might be super different or shocking to a first time traveler, or even just someone visiting the UK for the first time. So we'll start off with the language, and you might be surprised at the fact that even though they speak English, there are still so many words and phrases that we don't use at all in America. So you might feel like you don't understand someone or are speaking completely different languages at times. And even sometimes they use the same words, but they pronounce them so differently that it sounds like a different word, so you're still confused. So a language barrier is, definitely something you'd expect if you're visiting most countries in the world, but I think you would be surprised at how often it does happen in England, Scotland, and Ireland. If you do want to learn more about all the differences in American English versus British English words, phrases, pronunciation, check out this video. Next, we'll talk about grocery shopping. So just like most of the world, it's a lot more common to do daily grocery shopping here, or shopping for a few days, rather than going to a bulk grocery store like Costco or Sam's Club in the US and bulk buying groceries that'll last you a few weeks. Honestly, it just comes down to food quality and the fact that in America, our food is so filled with preservatives that it won't go bad for a while, whereas here in the UK and in Europe, honestly, there aren't as many preservatives, so the food spoils faster and you have to shop more. So that can be seen as super inconvenient to some Americans, but when you do realize that you're getting a much higher quality of food, I hope that does make you feel a lot better. Also, the groceries are so much cheaper in the UK than in the US, like significantly. You'll notice right away when you pop into a shop, so that's really nice. So now let's talk about bills. In all honesty, gas and electric are about the same price, at least comparing Brighton to when I was living in Austin, Texas. On average, I'll pay about £70 a month for electricity and gas for 2 people living here, whereas in Austin, it was about $80 a month for electricity and gas, but we did have an air conditioning, and the air conditioning was on 24/7. So if you really think about it in that way, the US is slightly cheaper. The Wi-Fi is definitely cheaper in the UK. It's about £22 a month instead of $80 that we paid in Austin. But a huge difference is that in the UK, we do have an additional tax called the council tax, which is based on how many people live in your apartment, and it covers like garbage, street maintenance, national health care, fire, ambulance, and police. The cost does depend on where exactly you live, but where I'm at in Brighton, it's about £180 for 2 people. And in the UK, you also have to pay a TV license if you want to watch standard live TV like the news or whatever, so no channels come for free. Next up, we're going to talk about small talk, because this is probably the only one on the list that really shocked me. Americans are known for being really good at small talk and just opening up to anyone about anything. Like, you might ask your waitress about their life, or on a work call, you'd break the ice by talking about what you did this weekend. But in the UK, they're not as keen to talk small talk or things like that. It's not rude by any means, but like they would never ask their waitress or coffee barista a personal question about their life. And it's funny because my friend who lives here, for his job, he's constantly on calls with people from companies all around the world. And he always says that he prefers to talk to Americans because they love to talk and keep the conversation going. And the part that I found so interesting about what he said is that if you ask an American how their week is going, they're actually going to tell you. They're going to go into details and tell you everything. Whereas in the UK and most other places, they'll just say good and not really go into much detail. Now let's talk about building floor numbers. So in the US, we always have the ground floor as level 1. Then you go up the next flight of stairs, it's level 2, level 3, and we go on from there. But in the UK, and honestly most other countries in the world, they have a ground floor, and then you go up a flight of stairs, and that's level 1. And then 2, and then, so on from there. So if you see an address that says it's on the first level, you'll actually have to go up a flight of stairs to get there. It will not be on the ground level. Next up, we have the plugs and outlets. Of course, I'm sure you know that they don't use the same outlet type as we do in the US. It looks like this. So you'll need an adapter to use your US devices, but also they all have small flip switches next to each individual outlet. So you have to turn on each individual outlet on in order to use it. So I'm not really sure what the purpose is for this, since most articles I found said it didn't really save you money on electricity to turn off the switch if your device is already off, but please correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. Next up, we have cars versus public transportation. So I will say that more people have cars here in the UK compared to a lot of other countries. countries that I've lived in where, you know, nearly everybody relies solely on public transportation to get around, but they still do have an amazing public transportation system. So you can practically go anywhere in the UK by train or bus, and can even get some direct trains to a few places in the EU like Paris, Amsterdam, and Brussels. And then even around town, there are tons of buses and metros, so you can easily get around if you don't own a car, including the iconic double-decker buses, which are such a great idea to be able to fit more people on the bus. So not really sure why more places don't do that. And this is obviously way better than the US because we don't really have much of a public transportation system around the country to connect all the states. Within individual states, or even some big cities don't really have much of a public transportation system. So in the States, it really is essential to have your own car. Now let's talk about car sizes. So in America, so many people drive huge pickup trucks, SUVs, even those like crossover SUVs, whereas the majority of the people here in the UK just drive something equivalent to like a sedan or even a tiny hatchback. Like, of course, you'll see a few vans and trucks here and there, but I'd say for the most part, they're like working vans or trucks, and people's daily vehicles are actually quite tiny. And I think that's because, you know, their roads are a lot skinnier as well. Like, I always notice about every time I come to the UK or Europe how narrow the roads are. But it was super funny to chat with my Irish friends who live here in the UK, and they just got back from a trip to Chicago, and the first thing they said was that the roads were so big in Chicago. So it was funny to hear the reverse side of that. Maybe our roads are big and theirs are normal, instead of me thinking ours are normal and theirs are narrow. But, you know, I guess normal is subjective, right? And to piggyback off of this, not only are the cars smaller in the UK, but the apartments, appliances, closets, and a lot of like home related items are as well. So most bedrooms don't even have a closet, so you actually have to go buy a wardrobe to hang and fold your clothes in. And in America, we're used to having huge kitchens with, you know, giant stoves, fridges, tons of counter space, but everything is really tiny here. Like, it would be hard to find a home or apartment with a dishwasher or a garbage disposal, but I will say I was pretty shocked that it's super common to have an oven, which is really nice because when I used to live in Prague, that wasn't very common. But yeah, I think Americans who visit or even try to move here will feel cramped because everything is on a much smaller scale inside the homes. And now, of course, I have to talk about the fact that they drive on the opposite side of the road, and the steering wheels are on the opposite side of the cars as well. So you drive on the left side of the road and are sitting on the right side of your car, which most people already know. You know, they know that about the UK. But one thing that I never really realized until I moved here was the fact that as a pedestrian, when you're walking and trying to cross the street, I'm constantly checking the wrong way for oncoming cars. So like, automatically when I'm crossing the road, I'll look to my left to see if someone's coming in the right lane and will hug the curb as they do a right-hand turn. Then I'll step out, and coming from my right is someone who just did that exact same thing. They hug the curb on their left turn in the left lane, since obviously it's opposite here. So I'm like, dang it, I need to remember which way to double check, which I know I should be checking both ways every time, but just something to know. Next up, we have the tipping culture. So in America, it is expected to tip for literally everything, especially post-COVID. You know, they just turn the iPad around on you. When you're paying at a food truck, grabbing coffee, or like even like self-service type things, you're still expected to tip every time. But in the UK, tipping is not mandatory, and it's definitely optional, and you'd really only do it at a restaurant if you wanted to. But the workers still make decent wages without the tips, whereas some places in the US, they make extremely low wages and rely mostly on their tips. So just like literally the entire rest of the world except the US and 2 other countries, the UK uses the metric system. So they use meters, grams, kilograms rather than inches, feet, and pounds. 2 things that are different here though is that they actually use miles, which I never knew until I got here a few weeks ago, and I do find very odd. Like, why use the metric system but also use miles instead of kilometers like everyone else who uses the metric system? I did read it's because they always have used miles, and they only switched over to the metric system for imported and exported goods so they can be compatible with the rest of the world. But since, you know, roads and train tracks don't leave the country, they didn't want to spend the money converting those into kilometers. So not sure how factual that is, but if you do know if this is correct or if there's another story there, comment below, because I'd be super interested in hearing why they use miles. Another term of measurement they use that no one else does is stones when weighing yourself. So 1 stone is equal to 14 pounds. Again, not sure why they use stones for weighing themselves, and then kilograms for other things that are weighed, but very interesting. A few other logistical culture shocks are the fact that they use Celsius instead of Fahrenheit for temperature, and they write their dates as day, month, year. So it would be 04/05/23 for May 4th. In America, we'd write it month, day, year, like 05/04/23. And the calendar is Monday to Sunday, not Sunday to Saturday, which honestly is the same in Europe and a lot of other countries too. And they also use both the 24-hour clock and the 12-hour clock to tell time, which I find really interesting. There's not one standard. You'll see both all around. So, 1700 or 5 p.m., they both work. In general, I'd say that the UK is probably one of the most similar countries to the US, not just based on the language, but also the culture and the food options of what's available for you. So I don't think you'll just be overwhelmed with culture shock when you visit, but you'll definitely notice these things that are very different from the US. So now let's compare them to other culture shocks I've found around the world.